You don't make scenes. You don't send the long message explaining everything you've been holding in for months. You don't give warnings or ultimatums or dramatic final conversations. You simply withdraw, slowly, deliberately, without announcement. The texts get shorter, the availability narrows, and one day the door is closed and not slammed, just quietly, firmly shut. People around you have opinions about this. They call it ghosting. They call it passive aggression dressed up as self-protection. They say you're running away, that you lack the courage for confrontation, that healthy people communicate rather than disappear. But Carl Jung would have looked at this pattern and said something that might surprise you. He wouldn't have offered simple reassurance. He wouldn't have told you it's fine, that you owe nobody an explanation, that boundaries are always healthy. Jung was not that kind of thinker. He was the kind who looked at human behavior and asked the harder question underneath the surface one. Not just what are you doing, but what is this really about? And the answer, according to everything Jung spent his life studying, is far more complex and far more revealing than either your critics or your defenders tend to admit. Let's start with what Jung understood about silence as a psychological act. Jung believed that nothing we do is ever just one thing. Every behavior carries multiple layers of meaning, conscious intention on the surface, and beneath it, something older, something less examined, something that often tells a truer story about who we are and what we've learned to do in order to survive. Cutting people off quietly is no exception. On one level, it can absolutely be an act of genuine discernment. Jung was clear that individuation, the lifelong process of becoming who you actually are, requires a ruthless kind of honesty about which relationships serve your growth and which ones keep you trapped in a version of yourself you've already outgrown. Not every connection deserves infinite patience. Not every person who wants access to you has earned it. There is real psychological wisdom in recognizing when something is finished and allowing it to end without performing a closure that neither party actually needs. Jung would have recognized that. He would have respected it, but he would not have stopped there. Because Jung also understood the shadow. And the shadow is where this gets uncomfortable. The shadow in Jungian psychology is the part of the self we don't acknowledge. The qualities, the impulses, the wounds we've buried so deep we've forgotten they're there. And one of the things that lives in the shadow of someone who cuts people off quietly, without confrontation, without explanation, is often this: fear. Not cowardice in the simple sense, something more layered than that. Fear of what would happen if you said the real thing. Fear of the confrontation, yes, but more specifically, fear of your own anger. Fear that if you opened your mouth and let out everything you've been quietly accumulating, you wouldn't be able to control what came out. That the version of you that finally spoke would not be the calm, composed, self-possessed person you've worked hard to present to the world. Jung called unexpressed emotion one of the most dangerous forces in the psyche. Not because feeling things deeply is dangerous, but because what gets buried doesn't disappear. It migrates. It shows up as distance, as the quiet exit, as the pattern of ending things before they can end you. And here is the dark truth Jung would have sat with you in, not to shame you, but because he believed the examined life was the only one worth living. Sometimes cutting people off quietly isn't discernment, it's the shadow wearing the mask of discernment. There's a concept Jung wrote about that applies here with uncomfortable precision. He called it the persona, the mask we construct to move through the world. For some people, the persona is warm, generous, endlessly patient. Someone who never raises their voice, never makes demands, never becomes the difficult person in the room. And the problem with a persona built entirely on composure is that it has nowhere to put what is not composed. So the rage, the hurt, the feeling of betrayal, the things that genuinely needed to be said, they don't get expressed. They get managed, quietly, efficiently, invisibly. The relationship gets filed away. The person gets removed. And from the outside, it looks like maturity. It looks like someone who simply doesn't do drama, who has too much self-respect to engage in messy confrontations. But Jung would have asked, who is that composure actually protecting, them or you? Because there is a version of cutting people off quietly that protects your peace. And there is a version that protects your persona, that keeps the mask of the person who is never rattled, never wounded, never in need of anything as messy as a real conversation, perfectly intact. The difference between those two versions matters enormously, and only you, in the honest privacy of your own inner life, can tell which one is operating. Jung also wrote about what he called the unconscious contract, the unspoken agreements we enter into in relationships, often without realizing it. Many people who cut others off quietly were, at some point, taught that their needs and their pain were inconvenient, that expressing hurt led to punishment or dismissal, or the withdrawal of love. So they learned to internalize it all, to process everything alone, quietly, efficiently, to become someone who doesn't burden others with their interior life. This is not a character flaw, it is an adaptation, a survival strategy that made complete sense in the environment where it was developed. But Jung was insistent about something that was, for many of his patients, the most confronting idea of all. The strategies that protected you in one chapter of your life can quietly become the walls that imprison you in the next. The child who learned that going silent was safer than speaking eventually becomes the adult who disappears from relationships without ever giving them the chance to survive honesty. Not because honesty is impossible, but because the body, the nervous system, the deeply grooved patterns of the psyche, they don't yet believe it's safe. And that's not a moral failing, but it is something worth looking at. So what does Jung actually say about you if you move through the world this way? He says you are not simply someone who lacks confrontation skills or avoids difficulty out of laziness. He says you are someone carrying an architecture of self-protection that was built brick by brick, from real experiences that taught you real lessons, some of which may no longer be true. He says that the quiet exit, when it comes from the healthiest part of you, is a form of integrity, a refusal to perform relationships that have genuinely expired, a way of honoring your own inner reality without needing the world's permission to do so. And he says that the quiet exit, when it comes from the shadow, is a conversation you're having with yourself that you haven't yet been able to have with the other person. Not because you're broken, but because somewhere inside you, the cost of that conversation still feels higher than you can afford. The work, the real Jungian work, is learning to tell the difference, not to stop protecting yourself, never that, but to become conscious enough, honest enough to know whether the door you're closing is one that genuinely needed closing, or one you're closing because opening it would require a version of vulnerability you haven't made peace with yet. That distinction won't always be comfortable to sit with. Jung never promised comfort. He promised something harder and more valuable, the possibility of becoming whole. And wholeness, in his framework, doesn't mean having no edges or limits or exits. It means knowing yourself clearly enough to understand why you do what you do. So if you cut people off quietly, you are not automatically damaged or avoidant or incapable of real connection. But you may be someone with an unfinished conversation, not necessarily with the people you've let go, but with yourself. About what you're protecting. About what you're afraid would happen if you stayed. About what it would mean to be fully, messily, honestly present in a relationship and survive it. That conversation is the one Jung would have wanted you to have. Not with them, with you. Does this resonate? Have you ever questioned whether your silence was wisdom or self-protection in disguise? Drop a comment below. And if someone in your life needs to hear this today, share it with them. The most important thing we can do is help each other see ourselves more clearly.